But rather than just talk to you about the steps, what we're going to do is have you do an exercise. And we're going to start with this sensible technologies, and this is what we call a technology push. Now just work with me on a technology push. It works for a market pull as well. But this one will be fun for you to do, hopefully. So this is Ken Salisbury, this is Thomas Massey. They're the MIT Artificial Intelligence Lab. They developed this breakthrough product called Phantom, which you can see if you go to the MIT Museum here. It's a device that if you hold and you look at something on the computer, you can actually feel it on the computer. It's an incredible breakthrough because there have been speakers that you can hear stuff, there's been displays where you can see stuff, but you've never been able to feel things before. And this simple device is the first time you've ever been able to do that in a way that was meaningful. Before, well, I shouldn't say meaningful, they built these elaborate exoskeleton devices that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, were very difficult to program, and were not very safe. This was like a three-dimensional mouse that you could just have here, and you could pick something up and see how heavy it was, and you could move it around in a very intuitive way. And so what I'm going to do now is show you a video. And what I want you to do in this video of what, like when I entered, when the company was coming out of the labs, and you are going to be me, and you're going to see this video and you're going to see the technology. And what I want you to do is I want you as a table to think about what are all the potential markets that this could be used for? Who are all the potential users? This is called market segmentation step, number one. Who are all the potential users for this? All right? And a table that comes up with the longest list of potential applications will win a highly desirable prizes that are invaluable and just treasured for the rest of your life, and also very low cost.
How science is helping to catch gold thieves. But first, Jeffrey Birchfield gets to grips with the latest in virtual reality.
Creating a machine that mimics the human body is a tough act to follow, but Thomas Massey isn't a novice at this. Since the tender age of 9, he's been building robots out of any spare parts he could find. Even his mother's vacuum cleaner wasn't safe. By the time he'd left high school in Kentucky and headed for the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Boston, he could build an arm that R2-D2 would kill for. This is something very special. You're looking at one of the most remarkable creations in artificial intelligence. Thomas calls it the Phantom, and it's true, there's not much to it, or so it appears, and yet it's capable of putting you in touch with your computer in a way that until now seemed impossible. So, throw away the keyboard, forget voice recognition. Phantom uses a much more subtle means of communication, the sense of touch. In the space of a few years, virtual reality has opened new worlds to us. Wired masks and other contraptions have allowed us to see and hear things that exist only in the mind of a computer. But we've been denied the one sense that would have made the virtual truly believable. We couldn't touch those objects and see what they felt like. Well, now that's changed.
Hey Jeff, pull up a seat. I think you're gonna like this.
Okay, I've been really looking forward to this. What do I do?
Well, just stick your finger in this thimble.
Yeah.
It won't bite.
Okay. The thimble is suspended by a jointed aluminium arm just above the desk. At first, it's quite lifeless already. But when Thomas activates it, and for now he still has to use a keyboard, it springs into life. Whoa. Good grief, it's alive. I quickly find that although I'm free to move my finger anywhere I want, if I push down, I meet resistance. It feels as if I've run into a hard, smooth surface. And then towards the back, I hit something. A wall.
Try moving your finger up. Here.
direction.
It's because I programmed a wall there.
Only thing is, there's nothing really there. It feels so solid. And the amazing thing is, I feel as if I should be able to see this, but there's nothing there.
Nothing but the phantom.
Now, I know this looks really suspicious. You're probably sitting there thinking, oh yeah, he's just got his finger in a thimble pushing it around. Well, yeah, that is partly true, but there's a lot more to it. The amazing thing about Phantom is that when I push with my finger, the thimble actually pushes back, like an invisible force field that I can feel through my finger. And it's such a powerful sensation that you can virtually imagine these phantom objects. Maybe you'll be more convinced by this demonstration. Now, instead of an invisible wall, my finger encounters some phantom buttons. But this time, as I touch each button, its image pops up on the screen. What's more, they actually switch on and off, and I can feel the click through my fingertip. Amazing. If I had my eyes shut, I'd swear they were real. So, how does it work? How can a computer possibly convey the sensation of touch? The secret is these black cylinders on Phantom's metal arm. They look like big hinges, but they're actually powerful electric motors controlled by the computer. They're instructed to exert a variable force on your fingertip. So, when you hit what feels like a wall, it's really just these motors stopping your finger from going any further. Yeah. Depending on how the motors are programmed, it creates the illusion of touching objects like slippery surfaces, bouncing balls, or what about something much more complex, like living flesh?
There's actually an eye floating here.
Oh.
In this direction.
That's great. One of the toughest things for anyone wanting to be a surgeon is getting enough experience. How do you know what it feels like to make an incision in a living person without actually operating on them? Thomas has already seen a role here for Phantom and has produced a couple of touch and feel simulations.
In this particular program, we're going to recreate the feeling of performing a brain tumor biopsy. So, I'm going to pick the path for a needle to go into the patient. Now, you can see on the screen the red represents the needle, and I'm touching the outer layer, the skin tissue right now, and the phantom is resisting me. As I apply force, eventually, I'll overcome a threshold.
Ouch.
And now I've already punctured this layer, and I will encounter further layers as I keep pushing the needle into the brain. The trick here for the surgeon, and what's so hard to learn sometimes, is how much pressure to apply before enough is too much.
It's likely that Phantom will make its commercial debut with medical programs like this one.
Subtract A, B, and C.
Meanwhile, Thomas and his colleagues, led by Ken Salisbury, are well into planning the next stage of Phantom's evolution, a multi-finger version that will allow you to hold virtual objects. And that'll bring a world of tactile experiences within our grasp. Imagine, for instance, a collection of rare and precious objects like this one. Instead of it being for your eyes only, using Phantom you could actually reach out and touch the untouchable. And it wouldn't even matter if you accidentally dropped something. What's more, by storing the feel of those artifacts within a computer, they could be within the reach of anybody, anywhere in the world. Sure, it's so...
Yeah.
Without a sense of touch, virtual reality will always remain at arm's length. That's why Phantom has so much potential. It's bound to make a name for itself.
Okay, so let me just tell you, Thomas and his wife Rhonda and Ken Salisbury come and say, Bill, let's make a company. We want to make a big company. And so the question is, what do you do at that point, right? And so, should you reduce the cost of it? Should you ramp up the production of it? Should you, get the IP file? Should you raise money? What do you do? you know. And if we had longer, I'd go through why all of those, you might do some of it, but the real fundamental question here is, who is your customer? And so we're going to jump into that and kind of jump over that, and I'm going to show you how this process works. Everybody with me on that? Like, what people often do is they look at the product and say, let's perfect the product. And that's not what you should do, because you don't know what product to build, because you don't know who your customer is yet. So you have to figure out who your customer is, and then we're going to start working on who's our product. And then we know, should we sign up distributors? Should we reduce the cost? Or should we increase the cost because we have to add precision? None of that stuff you know. So what we're going to do now is focus on who is the customer. And to do that, you are going to work in your groups and come up, the exercise here is which table can come up with the most ideas on what this can be used for. And say yes and. If somebody says something, you say yes and that leads to another idea. And that is the essence of what we're doing. We're doing brainstorming. Using everything should be positive. One person's idea feeds to another person's idea, feeds to another person's idea, and it just rolls. And that's how you get synergy in this. And you should be laughing and not critiquing. This is not a judgment stage where the top of the funnel, you're just trying to get, you're opening up the aperture and trying to get as many ideas as you can get in here. Because you do not know what will be the best initial market for yours. You do not know at this point. And if you think you know, we're going to get into that, you have confirmation bias, and that's not a good place to be. And oh, by the way, the rest of your team may not be with you. This is not just coming up with an answer, it's how do you build the team to go forward here that's going to be able to execute against this plan. So how you come up with that is you're constantly just firing away, writing down, everyone's getting to talk, and you're building off it, you're not being judgmental at all as you go through this. And this is important at the beginning. And it's, again, not just about opening up the aperture to get ideas. This is not something, again, new. I told you that. We try not to invent anything new. But IDEO has done this. Good brainstorming. Improv humor does this. When we take our teams that are at the high level, we take them to improv comedy places to have them go through this training. And by the way, improv humor is a really good thing, because if something bombs out over here, like you just pick it up and then you keep going over here. All right, who has the craziest idea?
A little bit of a dark one, but hugging a dead relative.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of Skyping with the dead, right? In a physical way. Yeah?
Lamborghini sale.
Lamborghini sales.
Lamborghini sale.
Go on.
So we've got this Lamborghini shop that no one's going into, and we've got this $75,000 coffee machine. So we're going to give everyone these tactics so they can feel what it's like to drive a Lamborghini, and we're going to solve all the problems for the first time. We're going to have Giovanni all over the place, virtually driving Lamborghinis.
Excellent. Did you have a lot of coffee at lunch?
Yes.
Good. How about you guys? What's the craziest idea you have?
Tiddlywink professionals with fear of flying.
Tiddlywink professionals with fear of flying. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we have a winner here. What's the craziest idea you guys had? I'm going to come back to that. Tiddlywinks professionals who have a fear of flying. Yes. What's the craziest one you guys had?
Virtual petting of wild animals.
Yeah. These, by the way, this comes up a lot. The one you had comes up a lot too, by the way. The one you guys had comes up a lot. What about you guys?
Similar, yeah, based on your previous job, the classroom required to remove a snake from Gatwick Airport.
That certainly opens up the aperture to things. Yes.
Traveling in time, traveling to the past.
Traveling to the past.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or maybe reaching out to aliens.
Yes. All right. What about you guys?
Probably being able to react to famous battle scenes.
Oh, that's good. How about you guys?
Don't ask me to explain. It says here, purchasing avocados. I have no idea.
That's actually a good one. Yeah. Okay, so this one wins here. And let me explain to you why this one. Where's the bag? You didn't get the whole bag. But you just... Here you go. You guys can pick out of the bag too. There's stickers and other things. The best one I ever had in my class was it was a pregnancy test for watermelons. Because as soon as you say pregnancy test for watermelons, every single idea that you can possibly think of is reasonable, right? And like tiddlywinks for tiddlywinks professionals that have a fear of flying. But it's so crazy that it makes everything else seem reasonable. It seems so now people are open to say whatever they come up with, and it's important. Going back to this being non-judgmental at this stage, you not preconceive. So opening up the aperture is a really good thing. Having really wild ideas at this point is good. These ideas will be sorted out as we go through the process. But opening up the aperture and let all the crazy things you can come up with is a good thing at this point. And what we have just done in this process, right, is not just open up the aperture, but we have inverted the process. Because the natural instinct of all entrepreneurs is to start focusing on the how and the what, not who and why we have it, right? And so for Thomas, he was like, should I use stepper motors or should I use ironless armature motor? Because we focus on what's in front of us. We focus on the product. And that is not what you want to do. You want to focus on who's the customer and what's the problem we're solving, and then build everything back from there. You don't say, how do we decrease the cost? Because you might want to increase the cost, as you're going to see as this develops. So the first lesson that I learned from going from company 1 to company 2 was, build the company from the customer back, not from what you can do out. Yes, you have an idea and you have some capability, but you've got to figure out how do you take that idea, how do you take that capability and figure out who is going to be your first customer and make that customer enormously happy. Whether it's Giovanni, whether it's Laura, whether it's whoever you want it to be. But you've got to build the company from the customer back. That involves the product, that involves the messaging as we talked about for Volvo, that involves distribution channels, that involves pricing, that involves who you hire, that involves everything. And that's why this chart is stop thinking about the world through your company and start thinking about it through your customer's eyes. All right? So now we would do the next exercise as we would do, what are the top candidates out of your list? All right? And we're not going to do that for sake of time here. In the class we'd say, all right, you've got this list of 50, 70 potential markets, sort it down to 8. All right? And then they have to sort it down to 8. And then I say, okay, I don't care what the 8 are. Why did you choose those 8? And this is the question. How do you sort down this many different, because you can't analyze 72. How do you sort it down? What would be the criteria? What would be some of the criteria you would vote people off the island based on? Profitability. Okay, what else? Sorry?
Market size.
Market size. So profitability, market size. What else?
Affordability.
Competition. Sorry?
Affordability.
Affordability, what do you mean by that?
I mean, they can really afford what...
Oh, willingness to pay, ability to pay. Yeah? Yeah?
Complexity.
What's that?
Complexity.
Complexity. Good. Anything else?
Personal alignment?
Well, who said that?
Personal alignment.
Well done. Well done.
Their culture.
Yeah. This is the first one that you go through, by the way. And and I'm not picking on you guys. Everybody understands. This is a learning environment. Every time at MIT, everybody wants to get to the analytic part of it. The first filter you have to go through is the personal filter. Is this something that you really want to do? This is what we call the raison d'etre. Why is the raison d'etre is Spanish for reason for existence? And it is, that's a joke, all right. Why is the world a better place? Why do you want to do this? Because if you don't really want to do this goes back to the question someone asked before, should we be doing something that we don't like? We don't think is good for society. We don't think it's, Lamborghini, that's not what I want to do for 6 years. If you're just doing it for the money, it's not going to work out really well. I can tell you that. Because when people just want to do it for the money, they'll stick with you when the money's good. In other words, when the elevator's going up. But guess what? There's never been a startup where the elevator's gone up. It will go down, and if people are just there for the money, they will get off the elevator. And they'll leave you. And that's when you need your people. So you got to have this raison d'etre, and this starts with a personal filter. I can see myself doing this for 6 years, and I would really be proud of this, and I want to be identified for it. You have to be all in on this. You have to like what the outcome of this thing. It's going to be your identity for a period of time. You can't be like something you don't want to be associated with. Technology fit is the next one. For this case of technology fit, do what we have really fit for it? And gaming was probably on everyone's list. Was gaming on? Yeah. So gaming is a really good opportunity. It's just not a good fit for our technology because gaming is very cheap and it's 2D. And what we had was 3-dimensional, and it was always going to be, cost $100 or more because it had 3 motors. So you can take software down, you can take molded parts down, you can take electronics down, but you can't take motors down. And we were 3-dimensional, high precision, 3-dimensional, and that's not going to fit for games. So there's a bunch that get voted off the island, and we're focusing on the 3-dimensional fit. And then we got into market attractiveness. How big is the market? How quickly do they adopt new technology and those types of things? And we don't have all the information at this point, but we're going to vote people off the island, vote candidates off the island. This one's huge here, odds of success. Can we succeed in this market? And this goes to some of the things you brought about, competitive pressure. When you look at the greatest entrepreneur of our generation, who is? Come on.
Donald Trump.
No. No, it's not Bill. Bill Gates. We love all entrepreneurs.
Warren Buffett.
No. That's Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos is the most amazing entrepreneur of our generation. We like Elon Musk, but nobody compares to him. Gates had a monopoly and kind of got a monopoly. But Bezos has systematically gone through this and built a company from 0 to $1 trillion company. And he's done it with teammates and other different teammates. But he started with one thing. Everybody remembers there was no Amazon before. And then there was Amazon, and they did one thing. And that was books. Because books was a market where you could get a highly differentiated product, get high margins, and it was booming. There are lots of people making lots of money. No, that was sarcasm. Books are completely undifferentiated. There's a number, the end number, and a book is a book is a book. And Borders was going out of business. Barnes & Noble's going out of business. It just wasn't growing very quickly. Why did Bezos pick books?
The most individual titles.
There was a dispersion, and he knew that was the easiest one to win because people were not going into it. And he knew if he could win that, it's kind of like, we'll talk about beachhead markets in a little bit, but you find your way in by making sure you win that first battle, right? You don't, if you're starting to build a new rugby team and you want to have a good season, you don't start off by playing the All Blacks in the first game. You play someone who's not particularly good so you can build up your confidence, build up your form and get things sorted out, and then you move up to the better teams. You like that kind of rugby analogy? It's almost like I knew I was in Wales. but odds of success, and then the strategic value, if we win this, will it lead us into other markets as well? And then, and so from that, we chose this. And this is not, I'm gonna leave these slides with you. All these slides, there's gonna be a lot more slides than I cover. All this stuff will be left with you. And this is the actual one, and this is not in the book, that showed what we chose after we voted them all off the island. So we had, in the entertainment sector, we had animators from movies at the time like Toy Story, that they create 3D digital content, and they needed to do that. We had the same thing in the physical world for industrial designers who created models that they would then build into physical products. And then we had medical visualization that would deal with 3D CAT scan data, MRI data, whatever the 3D data was, because you have to clean that data up. And being able to have this 3D device to use with touch was incredibly good value proposition for them. And then we had, you could simulate surgery, which you saw in the video. You could actually do telerobotics, where you could operate here, and surgeons' sense of touch is very important. And these would control small robots that would be inside the body that would actually perform it. So you would simulate, what was in the body here, kind of digitally, and you could do it. But that surgeon was controlling that inside your body. You could then deal with 3D data that came from seismic data analysis of the Earth, computing for the blind. You saw a picture there. This was a huge market size, and they loved the product. And then you had this using CAD data to do virtual prototyping. I could go through all these and explain to you. This, by the way, is not a market. And why is it not a market? Because it's just a technology. It says virtual reality. And if any of you are interested in virtual reality, you can talk to me at the break. I'll tell you all you need to know about it. It is 2 years away. No matter where you are in time and space, it is always 2 years away. And so this is a technology, this isn't a problem to be solved. This is a technology looking for a solution. It's a curio. And the only reason I put it on there is because, I left it on because, so you see the actual document, but also I had a board member who insisted that it was. And if you ever have a board, I learned this lesson, don't tell them they're stupid. Just like put their idea on and tend to ignore it and then to move on. Better career move in general. So these were the markets that we had, and I'm going to talk about how we filled this in. But for each one of these, we figured out who is the end user. It's not entertainment, it's the animator in it. In fact, in entertainment, there could have been multiple end users that we could have gone after. Each one of those would be a market segment. And what's the actual job they do? This animator did sculpting and animating it. That means moving it around. And then they had to paint it in 3 dimensions. And then why would they want our product? What was really, they needed something that was as easy to use as clay, but it gave a digital asset at the end that they could ship and use it, resize it, and then correct it. So that was the promise to them that made them very excited. Who were the lead customers, the lighthouse customers? That if you got these customers, that other people would follow. And this was Disney, Industrial Light, Magic, and DreamWorks. What were the market characteristics? They adopted technology quickly. There was high-priced talent. It was growing very, very rapidly. And who would we need to work with in order to do this job? We would need to work with alias wavefront, soft image, discrete logic, and the like, because they were firmly entrenched in there. We weren't going to replace them. Basically, we were going to replace their sculpting modeling tools, which they would use clay, or they were very, very unsatisfied with their digital tools. But they were very satisfied with their visualization tools, which these were there. And there were about 40,000 of these, and the competitor was clay, which was very clear, and then it was this thing called a Wacom tablet, which they used with these other digital tools. And the platform that it worked on was Silicon Graphics, which you may not know is a Unix workstation. And the Windows machines were just starting to come up because they had these graphics chips. But for us to do this thing and then have it feed into this, these partners' software, we needed to have these functionality. We need to have a stylus, we need to have dynamics that our models could move in a natural way, and we need to have a file format called non-uniform rational B-splines. So to provide the whole solution to do this, because you don't just provide a part of a solution, you have to provide them enough that they will use it. You know, if you have a new alternator for a car, nobody wants to buy a new alternator. Well, the only people who do are car companies, and they're very difficult. You're much better to get to the end user and sell an entire car with your new alternator in it, because that's what people want. The module by itself doesn't provide enough. So this is why we needed to license this stuff or get it from other people, but we had unique capability to do this. That's what this matrix looks like. This is a market segmentation matrix. And developing this matrix does two things. It first of all gets you to focus on the end user customer and start to figure out which is the best beachhead market. We're going to come to that in the next step. The second thing it does, which is really important, which is non-obvious, it starts to get your team to cohere and to get aligned on where are we going. Everybody has their say at this point. They might want to talk about some of these markets. And this was a great process for us, because everybody was really, not everybody, a lot of people were really interested in this. I frankly thought this was the market. But after we did the analysis, we all had to agree that the right market was industrial design. And that might not be the only market, but that was the one we decided on. Just really quickly, even though everybody wanted to do this, these companies had an oligopoly. That means they had enormous power to not pay us. And it was a very sexy industry, and they did not want to pay us for it. Even though we had a great solution, they would not pay us for it, because they didn't need to. Everybody wants to work in Hollywood. That's their business model. If we came back to it later, we could sell it. Medical visualization was very difficult because there was an oligopoly that we would have to partner with, and GE, and GE is very difficult to do business with, as is Siemens. And for a startup, that was the kiss of death. So it was a very concentrated market. They didn't have enough clout in the organization. Surgical simulation is a cost center as opposed to a profit center. And so they didn't have any juice in the organization. They said, they loved what we did, but they couldn't move it through the system quickly. So they said, surgical simulation, go to where the blood is. And going to surgery actually looked very, very attractive. But from a personal standpoint, we didn't want to do that because that would have taken 10 to 15 years. And I had 4 kids at the time. Thomas wanted to get back to Kentucky within 6 years. And it just exceeded our personal threshold at the time. Turns out this was a fabulous market, if anyone's interested. And so these other ones, while there's a lot of people down here, they didn't have a lot of money to spend. Which you said, affordability, their ability to pay was very, very low. Their sales cycle was too long. So we focused on this market, and we went all in on industrial design. And we went all in. We had raised $2 million early on because we just needed to stabilize the business because people wanted to buy it, and we could, for $2 million, we could do all this work, and we could start to build the FAMs, which we could sell to academic institutions, kind of this thing over here. And that gave us cash flow. But once we realized this was our market, we raised $5 million and went after developing a product for that market. And that's what I'll show you in a second. What's the meta point here? The meta point is, when you have your businesses, you should think about what are the many different markets you could go after, and then start to build a matrix like this. You might have slightly different things in the rows, but I would start with these things, and this is in the worksheets that you have in the workbook. And then build out this, and have a discussion as to which is the best market, and is there a sequence we should think about it? Because we want this, we could go to here, we could then go to here, we could go from here. Once we did this, we had credibility. We would have much more leverage to go here and then here. But that's the first step in this whole process, market segmentation. And what it does is it starts to coalesce your team, and you start thinking about customers. One of the things that I'm not going to have the time to go through here is how the hell do you fill all this in? And let me just say, you don't just do this with secondary market research. Secondary market research is done by other people. Primary market research is stuff you do by yourself. Caroline said, you know, you got to go out and see the whites of their eyes. This is one of the things that when Steve Blank talks about customer development, this is what people have been doing forever. Primary market research, go out and see them. And let me just give you a there's a chapter on this that summarizes it in the workbook. And let me just go through some key points of this quickly. I apologize in one respect for trying to do like 4 days worth of stuff in, you know, less than 1 day, but it is what it is. This is a primary market research thing, presentation where I talk about, you know, we have this 24 steps and we're just on market segmentation. But all of this analysis is garbage in, garbage out. You have to get good information to fill in that matrix to make the decision. And how do you do that? What that's fueled by is this thing called primary market research. Secondary market research is done by other people. Primary market research, you do yourself. And so people then say, oh, then I just send out a survey. No, that is not how you do good primary market research. That is the biggest mistake, especially engineers make, is they don't want to talk to this carbon-based life form called human. So what they do is they make up a survey and they send it out. In other words, they go quantitative immediately. Why is that a bad idea? Anyone who's done market research before? Or
it
just
produces numerical data.
You're just getting numerical data.
You don't get the
You don't get the
substance.
opinions of
Yeah.
humans.
You don't get the opinions. Yeah.
That was the one question.
That is the bigger. Everyone hear what Caroline said? How the hell do you know what questions to ask? You haven't just gone in and kind of assessed the thing. And if you make up a survey, what happens?
It tells you what you want.
Damn, you're good. Are you an entrepreneur? Are you an academic? You support, yeah, so, yeah, exactly. So what happens is you have confirmation bias. You go in and say, is my product good or is it great? They're like, I don't know what the hell your product is. And it's really not that important to me in my overall life, you know. But to get rid of you, I'm going to say it's great. Now, leave me alone. And there's all kinds of biases in that. So good primary market research, you go out and you start with open-ended questions. What makes a good day for you? What makes a bad day for you? And it's not focused on your product at that point. You're trying to figure out the big picture and then find out how yours fits within that. And you'll say, well, I don't care. You better care because you have to understand how you fit in and what motivates them. Just like we did with Laura and Giovanni. And so you have to understand the real problem you're getting after. And again, I wish I had more time to do all these exercises, but in the classes, all right, everybody has their idea journals and they go through it. And they say, all right, today we're going to start focusing on solutioning. And we say, the problem that we're going to do today is lithium-ion batteries. Everyone has this problem, that your phone runs out of juice. And it's because of the lithium-ion batteries. And today we're going to solve that. Everyone at every table, you're going to come up with new ideas for the lithium-ion battery. And we need to spread out the chemists in the room. All right, let's spread out the chemists to all the tables. And then they start brainstorming substitutions for the lithium-ion batteries in phones. And guess what? It's awful. I mean, I would say it's awful. It's very unimaginative. It's not a good entrepreneurial exercise. Why? Because they're focused on the technology. What's the real problem? What's the real problem?
Phone dying.
Sorry?
The phone dying. The phone running
Yeah.
out of battery.
Okay, so watch how we do this. I'm going to ask many why questions. Why is the phone, so why do I care about the lithium-ion battery dying? Because my phone does. Why is it a problem if your phone dies?
So stop working or stop doing what I'm doing.
You have to stop doing what you're doing. Why? Why do you care about stop doing what you're doing? Why is that a problem?
Positivity.
Because I was in the middle of something important.
What was the important thing that you were in the middle of doing?
Talking to your family. Reading.
Talking, okay, good. Here, talking to your family. Why do you need to talk to your family?
Because I love it and I miss it.
So what happens is, if we're in a real situation, would be like, you know, well, I need to be in touch with my boss. Why do you need to be in touch with your boss? Because he needs to get financial data from me, you know. And so now all of a sudden you realize that maybe it's a personal reason that you need your phone. Maybe it's a social reason you need to have your phone. What is the driving factor that you need to? How many times do you check your phone? So now we reframe the problem not as lithium ion, a technology problem. We reframe the problem as, you know, how do you stay in touch with other people for work? Or how do you stay in touch with people in general? Now brainstorm that. And the brainstorming comes back very productive. Types of things they come up with, you know, as soon as it gets to 80%, start turning stuff off. See, you know, come up with a prioritization of things that matter the most. And so those things get priority. Have Pilates or whatever it was. They had some meditation classes so that people become less addicted. Have it something that notifies people, you know, you've checked your phone 30 times in the past hour. Do you really need to do this? So all of a sudden, these are solutions to the problem that are much more effective for an entrepreneur to pursue than the lithium ion solution. You're not going to solve a lithium ion solution. That's going to be done by Samsung or somebody else. But if you come up with other solutions, those solutions could be very helpful and they're much more cost effective. Why? Because you really understood the solution. You didn't just say, I'm coming up with a technology solution. So this is in primary market research. You're asking why all the time, digging down. I'm not going to, there's another part by a guy named MIT and Eric von Hippel who talks about find users with the worst problem and figure out how they're getting around it to solve it today. Because he argues that many times the person who has the worst problem has already come up with a solution, they just don't productize it. And you could go in and productize it. The online class I'll point out to you later. And you better be surprised. If you're not surprised, it is probably just confirmation bias. You're just seeing the world the way you want to see it. So you have to have a plan. You should have a plan. You should execute that plan in it. And you have to understand what biases there are. And I'll give you some books. And you have to understand not just the realities we're talking about with safety, but the perception of them as well. You might think the competition is A. They might think it's B. Guess what? Both matter. Both matter. And don't just believe what they say. I'm going to show you that. Don't go to surveys too soon. You will go to surveys at some point once you feel comfortable, once you get to the point. You have to learn how to do customer interviews, and I'll give you a link to stuff. And the best people for doing customer interviews I've ever seen are not academics. They're journalists. Do we have any journalists in the room? No? So journalists are unbelievable at this. Has anybody ever been interviewed by a good journalist? No. It's unbelievable. Because they have to very quickly assess the situation. And they come in and they just interview you, and by the end of it, you're like, boy, that person's so smart. Then you walk away and you're like, wait a second, why did I think they were smart? They just agreed with everything I said. And why did I tell them all that? I don't understand. Why did I tell them all that? That could appear in the paper tomorrow, or whatever. And what they do is they've got a very good technique of very empathetic listening, is that they will come up and they'll go, yes, yes, and they'll repeat your words, and they'll just make you feel good. And they'll lean forward, and they'll shake their head, do all this stuff, and the whole time they're just pulling information out of you, non-judgmentally, just pulling information out of you, and that's what you want to do. And becoming good at interviews is one part. Interviews are insufficient by themselves. I know there's a lot of people say, oh, just go out and interview customers. You need to observe customers, because they won't always tell you the things that are true. So you need to see with it. You need to do their job if you can. This is immersion. Do their job. Buy the competitor product. See what it's like, right? And the other thing is user tests. It's a big area. A/B testing. Test with them. Stimulus response. See what happens. All these are really important. What you don't do are focus groups. Focus groups are big companies do them. you don't have the resources, there's an enormous amount of bias in them. I never believed in them that much, and you just shouldn't do them. They take too long, and you're not gonna get good results out of this group thing. And there's other things. So we have people pledge that if they change their mind, that's a good thing. That if everything just is reconfirmed, that's a bad thing. That shows you're being stubborn. So in this book, this is the workbook I mentioned, there's a whole chapter on this where I summarize what we've learned about primary market research. And then there are these 2 books that you can get, which are really 45 minutes each at the most, and they're free. You can just download them here, and it'll help you learn the skill. You must learn how to do primary market research if you're going to be an entrepreneur. You can. This is your eyes and ears. And even if you get the right answer today, it will change over time. Like, iTunes was fabulous, but guess what? iTunes is dying now because customer preferences have changed because of Pandora, that people are now willing to do subscription music businesses. And, we're talking about Lamborghini. The day you stop doing primary market research is the day your company starts